talk about.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. So it'll take a second for people to come on. I will also say that I kind of messed up with daylight savings time. So most of our people will probably come on towards the end, but they'll get to say
Okay,
it at
and we
some
can
point.
do it in an hour if you want. I mean, that's
Well, I just think we'll crack on and we'll just talk and we'll just keep it as relaxed as
okay.
we can because I don't trust my I don't have a lot of faith in technology, and I think if we wait an hour, something else is going to go.
I guess I just don't understand what's going on with this light. That the church bought it for me, and it's beautiful, but it's been working great for 3 weeks.
Yeah, this way technology works. I think until you're ready to actually use it and go live with something, then it all crashes at that time.
I was having
Um,
a terrible time with my videos, mics out, cameras, all this stuff, and then it sort of started to change back a little bit. And so I've been doing good for like a year,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden today, so it must be you. Can I say it's the luck of the Irish? Is that
Oh
an
yeah. Well, look,
appropriate ethnic
you know what?
reference?
I'll take the blame.
Now, where are you at? Are you in
Well,
Belfast?
well,
Are you in, are
if
you in
this,
Belfast?
I can see myself sticking already,
Yeah. Are you located in Belfast? Is that
and
where you are?
we live maybe about an hour outside Belfast. Yeah, yeah. So it's our church is about a mile from the center, from the city center, and it's very close to C.S. Lewis Square, that sort of
Okay.
thing. So um, yeah, I can see us on this, so it's grand on this, I think. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest tonight, or this afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. You will know him from his Fellowship Bible Chapel prophecy updates. He is a prophetic mind. He has a great grasp of eschatology, dispensation, but also what's happening currently in the news and how that relates. It's maybe to do with his legal mind, maybe to do with his analytical mind, but he's very welcome, guys. I know I can see you all doing it now already, but say hello. I say welcome to Mr. John Holler,
Yeah,
and
you're
we have
breaking
been
up
like
on
just
my end, by the way. Your voice is, and now I've lost the sound from you completely. We've been having trouble all morning here. Try my system settings. Hang on a second here. Hey, now can you? Let's try another test. Can you say something so I can see if I can hear you? Hmm.
hear me now.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Any yeah, yeah. Oh,
Hey, really important.
oh yeah. It's
Just been a night.
everybody's blaming the luck of the Irish now. So yeah. So let's jump in with a question. So if I cut out again, then John, you can speak. I don't know if you're aware. that on the 17th, which was St. Paddy's Day, the UK have fully enacted the ornament. It's been changed. It's kind of been changed to do to a certain way that's going to affect people who are preaching, teaching online, so that it's given Ofcom, the regulatory body behind mainstream media, powers to bring people who are broadcasting online speak offensive, which is the key word for me, offensive. They can face up to 51 weeks in prison. Now, I know YouTube and all are fighting against this, but do you see that we're moving into maybe the start of real totalitarianism um, in terms of media censorship and things like that?
I think I really think we've crossed the line into that quite some time ago. I think what's different now is that the people behind it have decided to drill down the legislation to apply to people like you and me. Before, if you remember, I don't know how many years ago, the EU put in place regulations to govern the tech companies. Like if we give you a notice and we don't like what you're saying, you have 24, 48 hours to take it down. It maybe publish a retraction. And if you don't do that, we can start instituting fines against you for each violation of up to 6% of your. I believe they went from EU revenue to worldwide revenue. Well, these are just draconian fines on speech. And so now what they're doing is, I think
Mm-hmm.
they're not satisfied that they've covered enough. They've covered, or that they're controlling it enough. So now they're drilling it down to a lower level, so that the effect is, whether they actually put people in prison or not, the effect of it is a chilling effect. It's to get people to say, "Oh, I have to be very careful with what they say." So, for example, on YouTube, we went through a long, I call it a long training period, and I don't like to use the name of the situation that we were facing with. I'll call it the Charlie Vector
Mm-hmm.
019er situation, and what you said about that, and the cause and the
Yeah.
treatment for it, and that type of thing. And so even to this day, I watch what I say on that particular subject, because part of what we do at
Mm-hmm.
Fellowship Bible Chapel is we have a church and we do teaching, and we've established a presence on our YouTube channel. And so I try to be careful not to interfere with that, because I don't want those teachings to get taken down. So we get regular
Yeah.
strikes. Well, not regular strikes. My first strike I ever got was, I played a clip of a lady here in the United States. She's Jewish, always was on the progressive side, worked in the Clinton administration, Naomi Wolf. And I did a conference in Canada for Last Days Bible Conference. So this would have been 2019, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And because, no, it was 2021. It was 2021. And because of the
Okay. Yeah.
restrictions, for example, they were going to have a live conference in Calgary. And they found this wonderful facility that sat about 1,500 people, but with the regulations and social distancing that was in place, they would have been able to have 85 people
Yeah.
in a 1,500 seat auditorium. And that just didn't work. So we did it virtually. So I recorded a video. I played a clip of Naomi Wolf, because one of the things I was talking about was the surveillance state. And she's a tech. She has a tech company. She was a feminist and everything, but she's very much swung to the other side, because reality kind of got in the way of her politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I played a clip of her. She was talking about, she has a tech company, and that when they really wanted to control us, all they were going to have to do was flip the switch in the
Yeah.
software systems that they had in place. So that clip got me a strike. I had never gotten a strike before. But a couple months ago, I had Patrick Wood. I'm sure you may be familiar with Patrick Wood and his work on technocracy. And he was at church back in
Hmm.
September, and he mentioned this Charlie Vector thing, and I got a strike. Hadn't got a strike for about a year and a half, or a warning for. And the warnings now, they used to stay on for
Yeah.
30 days. Now they stay on for 120 days. And if you violate it, then you
Yeah.
can't upload, you can't go live. And it's just, it's like this game that we're playing. So right now we're in the midst of this censorship game. There's a guy here in the United States. He has a Twitter handle of Mike Benz Cyber, and he speaks for hours and hours and hours on how all of these letter agencies like CIA, MI6, and different intelligence agencies have worked together to kind of
Hmm.
create this censorship platform to
Yeah.
control everything. So, I don't want to sound like I'm filibustering your question. Your question was exactly correct. What they're doing there with the 51 weeks is
No. No.
it's to chill people, but it's also adding prison sentence to it. And it's interesting that they chose 51 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm not completely familiar with the Irish system or the UK system, but in the United States, we have things called misdemeanors and felonies. And a
Okay.
misdemeanor is generally defined in every state and in the federal system as something that's punishable in prison for less than a year or less. So if your sentence is 1 year or 51 weeks, it will be a misdemeanor, which carries a lot less
Yeah.
lifetime restrictions on. A felony would be imprisonment over a year, and then you will lose things like the right to possess a gun, the right to vote, unless you get your record expunged, or depending on the state, some states allow convicted felons that have served their time to vote. But if you come in from a federal system, I have a client currently right now that's concerned about that because he's served time in federal prison, served a sentence, was released at all his probation, but he can't vote,
Right.
and that vote may go for the rest of his life. So there's this chilling effect, and I see people like Tommy Robinson and
Hmm.
people like that are put in prison for. I don't know how to describe it other than, well, I hate to use the term trumped up charges in the context of Donald Trump, but it's trumped up charges. It's legal
Yeah.
warfare. It's lawfare that's being instituted against people on an epic scale. And we've just gone through years of this here in the United States
Hmm.
with the J6 people, with people that were protesting outside of abortion clinics, praying in hallways near an abortion clinic. And some of them were sentenced. I mean, these are like 75, 78, 80-year-old grandmothers, nonviolent, but they were convicted under the Violence Against Abortion Clinics Act, whatever it's called here in the United States. And they're in prison. And so Trump, by the
Yeah.
way, interesting story. Trump came in and pardoned all of
Yeah.
them day one. And we're very, very thankful for that because these were ridiculous charges. They were lawfare. They were designed to chill speech. And one guy, by the way, who was pardoned by Trump and got out of prison the other day, and I haven't heard the result of it. He was to be sentenced on a state charge in the state that he lives in. I don't know if it's Wisconsin or New York or someplace like that, for essentially the same
Hmm.
thing. So we have this kind of dual system here in the United States. We call them dual sovereigns. So
Yeah.
you can be charged for a crime in federal court and found not guilty, but you can be charged for the same factual scenario with another charge in a state court, and that's not considered a violation of your right against double jeopardy. It's it's a crazy system in some ways, but right now the legal restrictions on speech, you would think, with the election of a Donald Trump, Republicans controlled both Senate and,
Hmm.
and the House of Representatives. that we would not be facing this, but we still are because the underlying apparatus is in place, and that's part of what Trump and Elon Musk and his team are trying to eradicate. And now we have, of course, I'm going far afield from your original question, but now we have
Well, even
judges in the United States going issuing injunctions like they're the president. It's an insane
mhm.
situation.
Even the Elon Musk issue has been sort of used over here by the British government, um, in the terms of, they're seeing him as a provocation. And I think the thing that strikes me is certainly I guess this is the state run sort of censorship machine. That we over here, I don't know if you're aware, we pay for a TV license. So the right to have a TV in your house, you have to pay for a license for that. It's not about streaming channels, but it's all to fund the BBC. And I find that fascinating that we're starting to see free speech in terms of YouTube sort of shut down. It's kind of like, for me, it would be like Joseph Goebbels' dream. And I'm wondering if we're starting to censorship, technocracy, all of that being shaped right now. I
Sorry
can't hear
about that.
you.
I accidentally
Can
muted myself.
Oh,
So
that's all right. I thought I hit something.
I just wanted to see, how far you went before if I could see your blood pressure rise through your face. Just a little experiment I like to run with the hosts that interview me. Yeah, you're seeing this put in place. I will tell you that I was sort of reviewing the news this morning, and I had to run a couple errands, and I told you it was a very frustrating thing because it was like everybody
Hmm.
driving on the highway was on drugs or trying to slow me down and get in my way. And maybe that's just me, because I was focused on trying to get things done in a set amount of time. But I was looking at the news today, and I have to tell you, whatever hopes that people had that Donald Trump election was a reprieve
Hmm.
for the world situation, tell you that it's been an accelerant in the opposite direction. Because I always talk in my prophecy updates about
Yeah,
acceleration,
yeah.
convergence, all these things happening that are prophetically related. And so a lot of people in the United States, they're very much in the Trump camp, and sometimes on the right, and sometimes the religious right, and they're just
Hmm.
totally beholden to everything that Trump does, and Trump was chosen by God, and everything he does is right. But it there's been no slowdown in anything that I would say related to the prophetic situation that we face in the world right now with the things happening. In fact, it's
Hmm.
it's it's accelerated quite a bit. And I mean, we could just look at the last 24 hours of news coming out of Israel and the Middle East, and we could do several hours discussing what's going
Yeah.
on there and the implications of that.
Well, I personally see, um, the election of Donald Trump, and certainly Donald Trump's isolationism and the trade wars and the tariffs, as provocation for the building of a new system here in Europe. You're starting to see alliances gather. Starmer and Macron are like two best friends in the middle of break time at school. They're just skipping along the path, thinking that they're building this system. They're calling for a standing European. Like you say, it's his certainly his presidency seems to be a catalyst for things. But are you seeing this? Maybe it is just me. It's something I asked most of my guests recently. Are you seeing this global reshifting and reshaping that I'm seeing? The likes of Turkey now being the provocator behind Al Jelini and Syria and all of that, do you are you
Mhm.
starting to see a reshaping for the end time system?
Yeah, it's I have sort of I'm a little bit more open than some of my
Sorry,
brethren. I
you
think
cut out there on my end.
okay, I think I'm a little bit more open to different ideas than some of my Bible prophecy compatriots. I think you had Mondo Gonzalez on the other day, if I recall. I think I saw the interview you did with
Yeah,
him, and I
yeah,
met Mondo this past year and got to know him a little bit. Did a couple conferences with him, and and he has some different views than other people have different views, like Tom Hughes and some of the others. And so I always say I have these baskets that I put things into. So I have an Islamic Antichrist basket. I have a EU basket, a Final Beast Empire basket. Some people say it's out of the EU, some say out of the Middle East, some people say it's America. So I just kind of put the little bits of evidence into all of those, and
yeah,
eventually one of them will overflow, and we can say, okay, that's the way it was. That's the way it was meant to be. But we're sort of in this transition phase right now, I think, where
yeah.
a lot of options are open. So I'm not very dogmatic on some of these things. But to your question on the EU, certainly the statements, I think you go back to February, the speeches that J.D. Vance, vice president from my state of Ohio, gave
Yeah.
at the AI conference in Paris, and then at the
Hmm.
Munich Security Conference, where he just sort of told you guys in Europe need to step up. And Trump has done things that are, I think, some people that say, for example, you might be pro-Ukrainian, and he stopped intelligence sharing with Ukraine. He's threatened to shut off the Starlink satellite internet system that they've been using to defend themselves against Russia. But he's also said, but he said this in his first term that Europe, you're going to have to pay, you need to be putting 4% of your gross domestic product or your annual GDP into defense.
Hmm.
And Europe has not done that. Europe has kind of gone, uh, relied on the United States. Now they're being forced into a corner, and those in the EU that I think have a globalist bent, certainly Emmanuel Macron is one of those.
Yeah.
Ursula von der Leyen, who's the I don't know president of the EU Commission or whatever it is
Hmm.
that they have, and certainly you have this. I don't know how else to describe him. This radical leftist that's now the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, and what's the nickname for him now? Two-tier Keir, where you have two-tier policing, two-tier sentencing, and now
Hmm.
they're trying to put together this EU defense
Yeah.
organization. Now, and it may or may not be play into Bible prophecy in the end. That's I think I'm willing to acknowledge that maybe there is this beast empire rises out of Europe, a
Hmm.
revived revived Roman Empire, if you want to call it that. But I think that I will use the trial lawyer term that I use. The jury is still out on that one. The final decision has not been reached. But it certainly could
Well,
come
let
that
me
way. I think there are.
propose something. Um,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, you cut out again. It's probably my side that keeps cutting out, but I'm just getting part of what you're saying. What I wanted to propose was, if you're talking like a Middle East sort of rise of a beast system from there, or from Western Europe, what about the reshaping of Europe right now in terms of being, um, how did I put this without being struck off? Um, the contingent, the demographic has changed. Certainly, in 1997, there wasn't one Islamic MP. Now we have, I think, 25 in major roles in government, including education and things like that. And we have seen that the Labour government, for instance, in the UK, is certainly trying to turn. what Islamophobia is in terms of blasphemy laws and things like this, even though they're not coining it under that phrase. Is it a case that the UK or Europe could be changing into something completely different than it's been in the past while? Certainly, with I'm trying not to be struck off YouTube here, but certainly with I guess freedom of speech from a Western Christian country that is, even into the Magna Carta, it's based on Christian ideals, and our freedoms are based on Christian ideals. But if we go back to the start of Ramadan, you had Keir Starmer and King Charles both celebrate Ramadan and Iftar at Westminster, but yet completely ignore Ash Wednesday. And I'm wondering if there's a reshaping there that fits in.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been this controversy for some time. Let me sort of tee up a little bit different way that I've been looking at it. So there friends of mine like Joel Richardson and some others believe in an Islamic antichrist. And then there are some that believe are really wedded to what I would call the Hal Lindsey idea of a revived Roman Empire. And I was making a point to someone I was having a discussion with, and this person is really committed to the revived Roman Empire thing. And I said, if this doesn't wrap up quickly, the European aspect of that might be Islamic anyway, with the way the trends are going. And they say when you get to a 10% point, 10% of the country being Islamic, then it's pretty much kind of gone to the edge. Um, so I think that so I think that's a big possibility. And I'm going to ask you, I just had a warning screen pop up. That I cut out there for a second?
I think it was me. But we're fighting against the technology issues, so it's just let's just keep going. In terms of like what we're seeing, it seems to be for me the move towards like of labeling Islamophobia as a thing and bringing it into the speech and the rhetoric, whilst at the same time suppressing Christianity. It seems to me that that's based on kind of certainly if we look at Keir Starmer, I would term him as a champagne socialist, um, because right now one of the things that he's done over here is he's cut benefits to the sort of lowest income strata, whilst at the same time committing to funding the Ukraine, what I would call the Ukraine war machine continually, regardless of which side, or if you have a side in that, it's just a continual forever war that he's looking for. And do you think then things like Ukraine, Israel, an agenda behind that for certain governments? Well, there certainly is when it comes to Israel, but probably more so Ukraine. Do you think there's an agenda to keep the war going?
You know, I I don't know. So I get in a lot of trouble when I talk about Ukraine. So I have some Ukrainian pastor friends that I've been talking to with pretty regularly over the last couple of years. So I will say this on a philosophical basis, and I hope to be doing an interview with Trevor Loudon in the next week or so, who's extensively looked at the communist, Russian, old Soviet KGB aspects of this. I am very much anti Putin. I think Putin is a very, very evil man, and he is not to be trusted. And I understand that we said that Ukraine would never come into NATO. Well, listen, Ukraine was never coming into NATO. Let's be honest, okay? And nobody was ever going to invade Russia in the lifetime of Putin or anybody following him for many, many decades, because the European army stinks. It's lousy. It's ill equipped. Germany, a few years back, they were talking about Germany had maybe 12 tanks that worked. And I was reading an article, and I talk a lot about demographics because we have that kind of the world is in the midst of this demographic collapse that's never been seen before in human history. And to the extent that it might have been seen a little bit after a plague or something like that, the collapse of birth rates across the West, across the East, across China, across Japan are things that have never been seen. So last week, while the EU is saying, oh, we're going to make a great army, we're going to build up an army, there was a big article on the Financial Times that said,
Hmm.
well, they got a problem with where are they going to get the guys to be in the army? Because you don't want 71-year-old guys like me running out there with our
Yeah.
canes and walkers and that type of thing leading a charge. You got to get young males to do it. And the problem is, young males are removing themselves all across the West from society. So now what happened back in the 2015, 2016, 17 timeframe was this massive immigration of military age Muslim males into Europe in
Hmm.
at least a couple million. And now, by the way, I was just looking at a stat the other day. The mayors of London, Leeds, Manchester, and another major city in the UK are Muslims. The head, I think you mentioned the head of the education is a Muslim, the head of the
Hmm.
Justice League or whatever they call it in the UK is a Muslim. And this is a shift that I don't know. Listen, I don't think anybody had this on our end time bingo card
Yeah.
that we thought that these things were going to happen and they're going to happen at the speed that they're happening. So I think the jury is out on exactly how strong an army Europe can build and whether the war in Ukraine goes on forever. I don't think it can. Ukraine is if everybody's running out of people, the country that's running out of people the most is Ukraine. I mean, the population of Ukraine when the war started 3 years ago was about 37 million. Now it's estimated to be 20 million because you've had, 40% of the country
Yeah.
have left.
Hmm.
And a lot of those are younger males because they know they're going to be into military. So Poland hosting like a couple million, 3 million Ukrainian refugees. Ukraine cannot sustain the fight with outside help.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. But I'll also say this: Putin's got his own problems.
Hmm.
I mean, I see various numbers. I think the best numbers say that there have been 800,000 to a million Russian military casualties, dead and injured in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war. And that should be a surprise. That's how Russians have always fought wars. But so there's this. So Putin has been very clever in the way
Hmm.
he's used propaganda to get people riled up in the West, and I think he's sort of drawing them in to justify what he always wanted to do because he's always wanted to get rid of Ukraine. That's a fact,
Yeah.
and I do think that Trevor Loudon has talked a lot about the Red Green Alliance, but he also did a phenomenal 37-minute interview with the RAIR Foundation, RAIR Foundation, about last August, where he kind of laid out how Putin propaganda was infecting the right in America. And it is affecting the right in America because you have this interesting thing where you have people that you might agree with 95%, and I'm on the right politically. You have 95% you agree on things, but then you have these few issues where you're just
Hmm.
literally at war with each other. And so Putin's been very effective at spreading his propaganda, but he has this big vision of restoring Mother Russia, just like Xi in
Yeah.
China has this vision also. So I would say that there's some uh, you can make the case like a Keir Starmer and the people in Europe being concerned about that. I get that, but the Ukraine war will never be won by
Hmm.
Russia, and it won't be won by well, it won't be won by Ukraine. I don't think it will be won by Ukraine with European help. But I don't know how much. I don't know how much damage has been done to Russia because of it. I've watched this extensively, and it's still very much an open question.
I think it's really interesting when you look at how Putin was able to latch on to conservative values in the West, and then that garnered support. Where it seems to be, it to me, it sort of reminds me of the old military, and you've seen society is so split one side or the other that it means that they'll go, well, that guy's good and that guy's bad, that guy's good and that guy, they latch on to people that way.
Hmm.
And it's also interesting when I look at what's happening in the Middle East, and you look at someone like Al Jolani, of the HTS, and you've seen this kind of attempt to, despite the heinous things that he's actually, and certainly the HTS are involved with right now, he's trying to outwardly rebrand himself with a suit and a haircut to be accepted by um, certain groups around the world. But I guess for me, it's shocking when you see the European Union go and shake the hand of an individual who's been involved with such heinous things, but is also an ex or a rebranded ISIS member. Do you think we're living in a time now where it's more image than it is substance? It's more what you're presenting than actually what you're doing. People don't care what you're doing behind the curtain as long as you're presenting the right image.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been going on. So Al Jolani is just sort of the latest manifestation of what I've seen going on here in the United States. For example, we had Obama. Obama never really revealed his true self. And then I don't think there's any question but that Obama and his acolytes were
Yeah.
were running things under the Biden administration, and so there's a war now to keep all that stuff from being revealed. Um, I mean, there's literally a war within our
Mhm.
government here, fighting. The guys fighting the release. They're running to the courts, and they're getting the courts to issue these ridiculous unconstitutional orders that don't recognize separation of powers and that sort of thing. It's insane. But yet, Al Jolani is just the latest manifestation of this, and this is a very interesting thing because it's clear Al Jolani was Al Qaeda. Al Jolani was Hamas at different points of his the makeovers that he's had. I've said he's now called Al Shara, so he's approaching more
Mhm.
last names than Elizabeth Taylor had in her sad life with all of her marriages. But he is
Mhm.
remaking himself, and it's very troubling to see the European leaders. And I think I'm thinking of this EU lady who went there, the foreign minister, I think, of the EU. And I mean, he
Mhm.
wouldn't shake her hand, he wouldn't look at her, and that type of thing, because he's a radical Muslim jihadist.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
he's come in and he gives this speech of, he trims his beard. Apparently, he's using the barbershop that Assad left behind in the palace there in Damascus. Got a nice beard. He's wearing a suit. He's traveling around on a private jet where he was living in a cave probably, 4 years ago. And so, yeah, you're at that very perceptive point that this is all about image and not substance. And we need to look at what
Mhm.
he's really doing. And I will give Israel a lot of credit. Um, Israel Israel is really taking it to the Syrian what was left over of the Syrian military. I mean, what Israel's done over the last 6 months, from a military,
Mhm.
strategic, intelligent aspect, is I think that if the Lord tarries and there's a history written about this period of time, it'll make a great movie because what they've
Yeah.
done seems to be the stuff of fictional writers. In fact, if you went to someone with a script based on what Israel's done over the last 6 months, the people at the production company would say, no, 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 you have to bring us something that's at least a little bit grounded in reality.
Yeah.
And it's been stunning. And so there were a lot of mistakes leading up to October 7th. And so I think the question on a lot of Israelis' minds is, who is this, the real Netanyahu, or is this just another one that's trying to make political points? Something just popped up in my feed from an Israeli
Hmm.
intelligence source that said it seems like Netanyahu is a lot tougher since Carolyn Glick joined his administration. The commentator
Right.
Carolyn Glick, who a lot of us know and have met and respect quite a bit. But, and now you have Trump, and Trump's essentially saying, listen, Israel, you do what you need to do. Go beat these guys. I've heard that Trump saw this 47-minute video that the Israeli government has put out about the attacks of October 7th. And he came out very, very strong. You guys, all you Gazans need to leave. We'll rebuild it. You're not coming back. Go someplace else and live. By the way, which has been done throughout history, even in recent
Yeah.
wars. It's nothing new. It happened in the Bible. It happened after World War II. And I don't personally see anything wrong with it because
Hmm.
having spent some time over there, spending a lot of time talking to people in Israel, they have a massive problem in the areas of where the people live that are called the Palestinians. Some of them are fine, by the way, but some of them, I don't know how to say this without sounding racist, but in the scripture and the Jewish rabbis teach that in every generation there is an Amalek. Amalek was the grandson of Ishmael, of
Yeah.
Esau. When Esau
Hmm.
married into the line of Ishmael, which has a very Bible prophecy aspect to it. And it's
Hmm.
interesting that a week ago, each week the Jewish synagogues read the Torah and Haftorah portion. I would highly recommend Christians go and follow those weekly readings and
Hmm.
portions because it's amazing how often they relate to what's going on in the world. So a week
Yeah.
ago, the Haftorah portion was 1 Samuel 15, which is where Samuel went to the king, the first king of Israel from the tribe of Benjamin, King Saul, and said, you need to go eradicate the Amalekites.
Hmm.
Hey, Agag, the king, and all of the Amalekites, every single one of them. And Saul didn't do that, and it ended up that Saul was killed. And it's just interesting that when Hamas stopped, keep not allowing the hostages to be released, and tried to take advantage of the ceasefire and get some free time. I think Seth Frantzman, my friend at the Jerusalem Post, said this in a Twitter feed or Facebook post yesterday. Hamas was using this quiet period in the ceasefire to rebuild itself. But then
Yeah.
last week it was, listen, and Netanyahu used it as a speech after October 7th. In every generation, there's an Amalek. Okay, Bibi, do what you know that you need to do. Trump is giving you the space to do that.
Hmm.
Everybody, you've got 80% support to do this in Israel or more, 80% or more. Just do it. And then this week, they celebrated Purim in Israel. And I was in Israel on Purim
Yeah.
probably 14 years ago. And, but that's the story of Haman and Esther. And Haman was going to wipe out the Jews, and they hung Haman, and I believe Haman and his 10 sons on the gallows that he had
Hmm.
prepared for Mordecai,
Yeah.
and the Jews were saved. And so here we have the exact same situation repeating itself at this particular time in history with all of these geopolitical things going on. And the question then becomes, why is it why is the church not on fire about talking about this? Why is it just in so many churches? It's like, oh well, this has always happened. Well, I don't think it's always happened. It hasn't always happened this way because now we have a nation of Israel in the land. And by the way, many of them forced back from Arab
Hmm.
countries
Yeah.
by Arabs. Thank you for doing that. And now they're complaining about it.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, there's so much stuff going on. I don't even know. I sit here sometimes at my desk trying to think what I'm going to talk about Sunday or if I have time to do a midweek update or do an interview like this. I don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've
I
answered a
think that's
single one of
the
your
biggest thing
questions. So
right now is no. Listen, it's great. I was talking about Purim on Sunday, and I was talking about how following in 1946, October 1946, Julius Streicher was hung in the cinders, and his last words were Purim Fest 1946. But there was also a story in 1941 of the SS invading a Polish town and making the Jewish population cast lots or draw lots to see they were reenacting Purim and trying to and they hung 10 of them. But the most amazing thing for me is in that story, it says that every one of those 10 Jewish men who were hung in 1941 went to the gallows singing praise unto Yahweh. And they started doing that because they realized that they were actually, the Germans at that time were reenacting this, but they didn't get the spiritual significance for this.
that's a very interesting point.
And I guess where I'm going with this is that we talked about um, yeah, and I think one of the things that seems to be impossible for the world to take is the reimage of, or the reinvention, or the reemergence of Israel as a state. I don't know what it's like in your area or in your uh, or around you in terms of anti-Semitism, but I can tell you that Ireland is rife with it. Um, I've told this because we've had David Tal on here before,
Sure, I know,
and,
David.
and I've said this that um, part of the Jewish community over here have reached out to us come the anniversary of October 7th, and they were inviting us to meet with them on the anniversary, but they were meeting at 4:30 in the morning because they were too afraid to be out in public. And that's in a Western nation. And I think the growth of anti-Semitism, the growth of and sort of disguising it under the term, "Oh, we're not anti-Semitic, we're anti-Zionist," it's just nonsense. It's this vile hatred for me, which is one of the biggest alarm bells about the season and the time that we're in. Because I don't know if you would agree with that, that's a prophetic alarm bell going off the growth of anti-Semitism. I I I, I want to know your thoughts on the the new ground incursion going into Gaza, the uh, breaking of the ceasefire, the breaking down of the ceasefire. Um, what are your thoughts in terms of where this is going? Is this going to continue to make Israel a burdensome stone, a cup of drunkenness? Is this going to continue or accelerate to the point of Jeremiah 49, Isaiah 17, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I just don't know how quickly that's going to come out. I mean, look, we have to admit that it's interesting because I speak at conferences with guys who are very learned in Bible prophecy, even more so than I am, and they've written books and they've studied it and all this type of thing. And I will be honest with you, when we get together sometimes and we talk in the green rooms in the back, uh, with no open mics, we're like, I didn't see that one coming. And
Mm,
so, I mean, how many of these I didn't see that one coming moments do we need? And that's sort of why I'm a little bit more open minded in the way I
Yeah.
kind of take a look at things, because nobody called Charlie Vector L19er. Let's be honest. No one called the ratcheting down of the police state.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think Patrick Wood and some others saw this technocracy coming, but I think if you pin Patrick down and you talk to him, it would be something that he would say. And I do roundtables on a regular basis with Patrick and some others on
Hmm.
technocracy and transhumanism and AI and all that. If you pin Patrick down, and I know this because I heard him say this in the last year, was I remember hearing him say, I don't think this is it. And then like a month later, he's saying, okay, yeah, this is it. And this has gone way beyond anything that we've ever seen. So it's
Hmm.
happening on the technology side. It's happening on the geopolitical side. It's happening on the religious side. And it's very difficult for any one of us to keep up with this. So where is Israel going? That's the question you ask.
Yeah.
I think that you are going to see something happen with regard to Iran in the very near future. I think you're going to see something, some kind of attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities. Israel has taken out the more modern aspects of the Iranian air defenses, but that happened back in October. That's an asset that they have. Lack of
Hmm.
air defenses. That's a declining asset because Iran is in
Yeah.
the position where they can reconstitute their air defenses. They might be able to get something from Russia. And they're very clever, very smart. And Iran is in the midst of a political meltdown within the country. I
Hmm.
mean, there were videos that came out published in Israeli television last week showing people complaining, hey, we're the normal people here in Iran. We don't like the regime, but we
Yeah.
don't get to shop in the fancy shopping malls. We don't get to live in the elite neighborhoods. We're not able to let our women dress in Western garb. We're really repressed, and they've about had it. So I think to deal with the Persian problem, Israel has a narrowing window of opportunity. At the same time that they do that, they have to watch their flank. They have to watch Hezbollah. They have to in the north. They have to watch a reconstituted Hamas in the south, and they have to continue the rather stunning operations that they've been engaged in throughout the area of Judea and Samaria that the world calls the West Bank. So all of those fronts are very
Yeah.
active and very open, but the head of the snake is Iran, and something needs
Yeah.
to be done very soon. And Trump's sort of sending mixed messages. Do it, Israel, but let's try to make a deal. And so I think Netanyahu's trying to navigate that space. Whether he's doing it for his own save his own political skin or not, I don't know, and I don't really care.
Hmm.
I just know that Iran, by all estimates, now has enough material for 6 nuclear bombs. Now, whether they can deliver that, okay, that's a question. Whether they can get it on a miniaturize it and put it on a missile and weaponize it, that's still an open question. But do you want to be the prime minister when they finally get over that edge, where they're able to open that door? And
Yeah.
you can't do that politically. So I just suspect that there's going to be something done there. And I also suspect, I don't know why it hasn't happened. Israel needs
Hmm.
to go in and flatten Gaza down 300 feet to get rid of
Yeah.
all those tunnels. I do not understand the world. The so I want to address the anti-Semitism, and then I want you to remind me
Hmm.
to talk about Turkey and Syria for a moment,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think that's incredibly significant from a prophetic standpoint. The rise of anti-Semitism in my own life, at least that to which I am exposed daily, is off the charts. My X feed is an anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Christian, anti-Jew screed every day, all
Hmm.
day, all night. It never stops. It's like It's like a country that is not figured out that, it'd be a good idea to not have open sewers.
Mm.
Okay, so the open sewer on X is anti-Semitism. You see that happening in many aspects. Can I just share one personal story?
Yeah, go for it.
I did a conference a couple years ago in another country, and there was a person who traveled to that conference thousands of miles, mainly, I was told, to hear me speak.
Hmm.
After the conference, that person went to Israel. Now that person has written a book and comes out with the most Israel Jew hatred stuff you can imagine, and claims that she's being led by the Lord to do this. This is an egregious misconception of what God's will is. This is somebody who's completely lost the plot. And it's at
Hmm.
this point where we could have a very long discussion about the final days of apostasy and what that
Yeah, yeah,
constitutes. But listen, by every objective measure, this person appeared to be a Bible believing Christian.
hmm,
And now I can say without reservation that this person is not.
yeah,
And somebody should. So the question was then we get into what's the apostasia mean, and Second Thessalonians, was it somebody who was saved, or were they never saved, or they decide to walk away? I think people can walk away from the faith. I think this is a example in my own life of something that I've watched unfold over the last 2 years, and I have to tell you, Pastor Gary, it is it's shocking. It's so hard to deal with. I can barely tolerate what I'm seeing in this regard. Because I love Israel,
hmm,
and there's a messianic pastor who's got a book coming out on Romans 11, and I don't know whether it's good or not, but the hatred that he's getting for talking about Jews in Romans 11 it's unbelievable. He says, I can't believe
yeah,
what I'm seeing. And how did we get here? How did we have this window where everything seemed to be okay and now it's not? Well, this is what happens in the end times.
hmm,
Things happen. What's the old saying I quote from a Hemingway novel? Not that I think Hemingway is scripture, but I think he had a good handle on how, to give us a phrase on how the end times would go. I think it's in The Sun Also Rises, a couple characters are talking, and one character says to the other, how did you ever go bankrupt? And the guy says, well, I went bankrupt in two ways. First gradually, then suddenly. And I think this is how this end times thing is unfolding right in front of our eyes, that
yeah,
all this stuff happens gradually and then boom, it's right there. We just had an example.
yeah,
So now so I said I wanted to talk about Turkey because I think this is incredibly significant what happened.
hmm,
So, just to give you a context, in 2011, March of 2011, I was in Israel. We were staying at a resort, on a tour, spent a couple nights at this place on the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee. I woke up the morning, we were getting ready to leave. We're going to head down to Beit Shan, down through the Jordan Valley to Masada, then up to Jerusalem. But there were news reports that morning that there were riots in Dara. So I looked it up on a map. It
hmm,
was 30 miles away from where I was sitting. So here I am sitting at the Sea of Galilee, and the picture in front of me is the Sea of Galilee looked like glass. It was very calm and smooth, reflection of the hills and mountains around. And 30 miles away from me, Syria was melting down. And here we sit 14 years later, and Syria has now gone through another revolution. So they were able to do this. And so there were a lot of different factions. Syria was always a fake country. Iran took
hmm,
advantage of that. They made league with the Alawite division, or the Alawite regions of Syria, and the Assads made peace with the Alawites. And so they ran a very corrupt, very evil, very wicked regime. The Assad regime was making probably a profit of $2 billion a year. The Assad family making a profit of $2 billion a year off the Captagon illicit drug trade throughout the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
They had these prisons that were torture chambers where they're unspeakable, and now they're uncovering, have been since the revolution in December, uncovering only what you could say is cities of mass graves, where there might be 250 or 300,000 people buried. But what happened in Syria was that so everything kind of reached a point of stasis. Everything seemed to be kind of settled down. And back around 2017, these rebels in the Daraa region there in southern Syria, which you're reading about a lot now in the paper,
Yeah.
they took those rebels. This is kind of an interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people picked up on. I got videos of this. They took the rebels, they put them on these giant tour buses, and they moved them to Idlib. Now, why did they do that? Part of that was done. It's what they do after wars. They take the bad population and they move them someplace else so they don't have their geographic moorings about them. So they moved them to Idlib. Now enter Erdogan. I remember sitting at a dinner at a table. It was me and Chuck Missler and Bill Koenig. It was probably 15, 16 years ago. And I asked Chuck, what do you watch? And he said, pay attention to Turkey. So I took his advice. I've paid attention to Turkey ever since. And it's interesting that the leader of Turkey is a guy who's 2 days younger than I am and 26 days older than Bill Koenig. We're all born in the same 4-week period.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an interesting, it's not significant or anything, it's just kind of an accident of history.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we watch Turkey, and I've written articles about it, I've talked about it a lot. And so what Turkey did was they saw an opportunity. They wanted to get rid of the Assad regime. Erdogan wants to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. And when those rebels from the south were moved up, they were aligned ideologically with Erdogan. So this is 2017, 2018. So for the last 6 years, Erdogan has been building up a force to take over Syria. Israel came in and got rid of Hezbollah, got rid of Hamas, took out the Iranian air defenses, and Erdogan's sponsored group, HTS, said, okay, now's our shot. And they took over Syria in 8 days. And the fall of Damascus, I mean, Erdogan in his year-end news, not Erdogan, Putin, and because he knows, because Putin's got military bases there and he's had forces there, sometimes 5 to 50,000 people helping out the Assad regime. So he knows what's going on. He's a smart, very, very smart guy. And he said that in his news conference, 30 to 40,000 people in the Syrian military protecting Damascus, and HTS took it over with 800 people against 40,000. 800 people against 40,000. And now Erdogan effectively controls Syria. And then January 1st, and if you've listened to me, I talk about this all the time because I think it's very significant. And maybe I should not talk about it because I seem to be the only one. But Erdogan's son, who's now very active, he's going down and meeting with al-Shara in Syria on a fairly regular basis, mostly in secret. But he did a protest, a pro-Palestinian, pro-Gazan protest in Istanbul on January 1st, the first day of the year. And the poster of it's very significant. It's a picture of a sun rising, behind Istanbul, half Turkish flag, half Palestinian flag. And it says, "The sun is rising." I'm just telling you, is like, if you were writing the significance of Turkey in the end times, I mean, we can argue about Russia. Okay, you can make the case for and against. You cannot make a case that Turkey is not involved. And this Ezekiel 38 and a lot of these other things. And then there were 3 pictures below this thing, and there was a phrase and 3 pictures. One was a picture of Hagia Sophia. It is the largest church ever built in Christendom. And we don't want to argue about whether they're Orthodox theology is correct, at the Hagia Sophia, symbolically to Muslims, it is the largest church ever built by Christians. So the poster
Hmm.
says, yesterday, Hagia Sophia. So 4 years ago, Erdogan turned the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. That was a geopolitical earthquake. So his poster
Yeah.
says, yesterday, Hagia Sophia, Christians, the symbol of Christianity. Today, Umayyad, there's a silhouette of or a picture of a Umayyad mosque in Damascus. Today, Damascus, that's the Umayyad Mosque, the Shiite empire that came out of Persia. Today, the Shiites. We've
Hmm.
taken over the Shiites. And then there's a picture of the Dome of the Rock, and it says, tomorrow, Al Aqsa, and it means tomorrow, Al Aqsa, the Jews. So we need to look at one, the scriptures, and then what they're saying and the imagery that we're using. And I think this is an incredibly important piece of this end times unfolding right in front of us.
I remember reading about the Vilna Gaon, the rabbinic sage of, I think, the 17th century, and he wrote in terms of end times. He said that when you see Russia take Crimea, it is time to put on your Shabbat clothing. When you see Russia in Turkey, then the time of the Messiah is at hand. And whether that's the Messiahs in, we're talking about Jesus, or I don't know if he was messianic at his core, maybe kept at the side, or it's talking about, the certainly with Erdogan's regime, he's been this. He has reshaped the Middle East when others couldn't, or when others
Right.
have tried and failed. And then today, or this morning, we see that there are active protests that the Turkish parliament had to um, close session because there are active protests against Erdogan and his regime. And I think that's because the mayor of Istanbul is one of his political opponents. But
He's probably the most significant political opponent to Erdogan, and I believe there are elections set for either this year or next.
yeah, do you think then it has? Do you think, like you say, it's going to, the power of Turkey is going to pass to his son, or it's going to be someone else, or do you think his ambitions to restore the Ottoman Empire are going to keep him in power longer?
So when you look when you if you watch Erdogan a lot, like I have over the years, Erdogan is always picking up significant parts of Turkish history. Look what we did in
Mhm.
1492 or whatever. He picked some date 500 or 600 years in the
Yeah.
past. Look at what we did. Look at the great military thing. Look what we did in the Ottoman Empire. And so, personally, I don't think Erdogan thinks that maybe he's the guy, but he's got a role to keep pushing it towards what he thinks is the inevitable reconstitution of the Ottoman Empire
Hmm.
under Turkey. Whether it's him or his son or his grandson, he in the West, we worry about the next election cycle
Yeah.
or the polls that are coming out next week. Erdogan, he looks at things with a centuries long back and centuries long forward perspective. Very interesting. After around the time that this poster and this
Hmm.
was released for this rally, Erdogan was giving a speech, and you can follow his speeches if you can. It's sort of torturous, but if you think my prophecy updates are long, go watch Erdogan's speeches and get your translations. They're all pretty good. But
Hmm.
around the time that this poster was released, he spoke at a party rally. And at the rally, the crowd started chanting. And this is kind of interesting terminology that we use because when we look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about the chief prince of,
Yeah.
Meshach, and that type of thing. And the crowd was chanting, Chief, repeating, Chief, take us to Jerusalem. Chief, take us to Jerusalem. And Erdogan's response to the chant in the crowd was, victory comes to the patient. And so then you see the poster. Yesterday, Hagia Sophia. Today, Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. And tomorrow, Jerusalem. And that's the focus. And so I don't know that whether he knows whether he's going to get there or not. There was a, significant happening years ago. You can find the video on YouTube. Erdogan going to the Great Mosque, the
I've
Grand
seen it.
Mosque in
Yeah.
Mecca,
Yeah.
visiting the Kaaba. But what did we
Hmm.
just see less in the last month? Al Julani, Al Shara going to the Kaaba in Mecca and reserved for elites like him, Muslim political leaders. Erdogan went inside the Kaaba. Al Julani went inside the Kaaba in Mecca. These are all incredibly significant things from an end times perspective. And they're unfolding right in front of us. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. I don't understand why this isn't at least every pastor doesn't talk about it at least once a month. It
Yeah.
makes no sense to me.
Yeah. I think that, like, speaking as a pastor, I think that one of the things that I've noticed, because we speak about prophecy all the time. It's probably the bulk of everything. And if we're teaching on something else, we relate it to the now word. We relate it to the prophetic
Mhm.
things that we're seeing. But as a pastor, I felt that has made me unpopular with other pastors, because there's the growth of the norm mentality.
Mhm.
There's the sort of ideal that people are just wanting to talk about. There's still, certainly in the West, there's still this church growth movement happening,
Mhm.
and I think there's a lot of people that just don't want to hear it. A lot of people in the church that don't want to hear it, and it's heartbreaking because, like you pointed out, you it's certainly something I've said. Jeremiah 49 and the possible destruction of Elam, or the bow of Elam. That's in the news. That's being broadcast as a possible policy, both from America and Israel's point of view. But that's a prophecy that is about to be, at some state, I believe, in the not too distant future, fulfilled, and that should be alarm bells to people who are lost and not actually um, submitted to Christ. That should be an alarm bell. And I think that for me, taking on the hireling mentality, you're not wanting to keep the people warned. And Ezekiel 33, verse 6 says that if the watchman doesn't warn the people on the wall, then the blood of the innocent is upon his hands. And I think that, this is why it's so important to have a community of watchmen calling things out. And I'll have to admit, I watch your updates, and I steal from your updates because you can do a lot of the research, and then I can just take them and just write them down, and it makes it easier for me. But if you were to pick out one thing, I suspect, I think I know where you'll go with this, but if you're going to pick out one thing prophetically that's fulfilling or converging right now, that you would want to wake every pastor and every church up with, what would that be?
Well, I think there's two things. One is among the Orthodox community in many respects, Jews are divided into a lot of different little subgroups, but there's a messianic expectation in that community. And I think it's on, it relates to the temple, it relates to restoration of some of the things in Jerusalem. And so I think that sort of devolves to us as Christians that we should not be, hey, we got it. Why can't you guys figure it out? And it's like that violates what Paul said in Romans 11. Don't be haughty, proud towards the natural branches. So I think we have I'm not sure I think we really need to sit down and have a discussion about how we bring the teachings of Jesus into that community. It's a growing people believing in in the Jewish community and Jesus as Messiah,
Yeah.
as Mashiach is growing, and it used to be a couple hundred people. Now it's probably, if at least I've got a report sitting here on my desk that somebody shared with me, a big survey that was done, and I think it's around 20,000. It might even be up as high as 30,000. That's a significant growth in the last 30 years.
Hmm.
Uh, that's one. And then I also think the centrality of Israel in Judaism, I'm not Judaism, Jerusalem, in geopolitics. I mean, it's in the news every day. And it's not like we're making it
Yeah.
up. But then again, there's going to be this rise of anti Semitism that goes along with that. So it's interesting when you see, for a while, Hezbollah was publishing pictures of each martyr. And
Hmm.
each martyr had a page at the Almanar website. Then Israel took out so many of them they couldn't keep up, so they sort of stopped. Now they're starting to do it again. But each martyr has the Hezbollah symbol and he has the picture of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And every single martyr, including Nasrallah's, was said he was martyred on the road to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is central to their narrative of their end times and everything like that. So I'm not saying their eschatology is correct. I'm just saying is that's what they say. Listen to what they say, and I think we need to figure out what they're saying. So there needs to be. We need to figure out. Well, first of all, we need to rely on God to direct people
Yeah.
towards Him and His Son. So I think that was part of the church growth movement. We thought, well, we can be very clever and we can kind of bring people along. And I'm like, I've seen people get saved after really lousy sermons. So it seems to me that the Holy Spirit and God has a lot more to say in what's happening there.
Hmm.
But we also need to, pray for opportunities to share the gospel with Muslims and others in our world. And I just think we need to be in fellowship with other believers because it's going to be a very difficult ride at times.
Yeah. And the thing is I think that as long as all the believers are kind of cemented on the core principles and the principles of salvation, we can disagree on the minor things of what's happening geopolitically and stuff like that. But I think, like I've said to so many people, when we on our street ministry that we do, we're talking to the unsaved, and the biggest or the most common statement or question that we get back from people who are unsaved is this end times. And I think that's a marker in which the church has got to grab hold of and realize, hold on, there are people who are recognizing it, but if the church is silent and not wanting to address it, then the church has to wake up. Um, Listen, I want to thank you for coming on today. And there's been a whole load of technical issues. When you're speaking, I'm getting like parts of it cut out because it's not you, it's my side. I've realized that. Um, and I think that, you know what, by the grace of God, we've been able to cover quite a lot in the time that we've had. So again, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on. I've been wanting to have you on for a while, um, but again, I steal from you quite a lot. So
That's okay. I don't mind. Uh, I was a lawyer, so they say the best lawyers are the best plagiarists. So because we we copy and borrow from other people. I mean that's sort of the way the profession is. So I
yeah,
take it as a compliment.
it is a compliment. So guys, my phone. I know that people had questions, but unfortunately, my phone is now on 1% and it's about to die. And all the questions that have been sent to Discord, I know that as soon as I turn my screen on, it's just going to die on me. So unfortunately, I'm not going to do the questions. But hopefully, John can come back on, and all of the technical issues will be sorted, and there won't be an internet issue or anything like that. Um, so, guys, again, can you say thank you to John for coming on? And I'm going to close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for tonight, Lord. I thank you for this gathering. I thank you that we can come together and glean from your word, Lord. I just thank you that your revelatory word is opening the eyes of people, and it should be gleaning from you. It should be gathering from your word. It should be holding on tight like the Church of Philadelphia to your name and your word and not letting go. So Lord, we thank you for John and his family, and Lord, we pray a blessing around that, around his family, his house and his ministry. And Lord, we just thank you for this time tonight in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. So, guys, I call you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, kings, queens, and priests in Jesus' mighty name. And remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Guys, God bless.